Chungmanyok Natang Sin Machinale. That is Tibetan. And what it means is just as water, if you do not stir it, remains clear, so too does the mind, if left alone, find its own way to tranquility and peace. Just as the mind, or just as water, if you do not stir it, remains clear, so too does the mind, if left alone, find its own way to tranquility and peace. It's a lovely, lovely saying, and really speaks to the heart of our theme tonight, which is equanimity, as the final of the 7 factors of awakening that the Buddha teaches in his 10th discourse, the mindfulness teaching that became Satipatthana, the mindfulness foundations. Yeah, it's been, wow, it's hard to believe. It's actually been about 8 weeks because we skipped a week going through these 7 factors. And I know I promised you would all be enlightened by the time we reached the 7th factor. If it hasn't happened yet, be patient until the end of tonight. And if not, you can stay after, we can talk about it. Oh, if it were only that easy. Yeah, so the text. The text, Satipatthana, the Buddha tells us that these 7 factors that we can cultivate in a linear way. We can cultivate the first, mindfulness. If we are feeling unmindful, we still have faith that mindfulness is possible and that we know how to cultivate mindfulness, right? These are the stages that even if we're not feeling mindful, it doesn't mean there are not fruits of our meditation. Part of this is that by the time our practice has given us a tangible, gross level experience where we actually feel different, we feel changed somehow, we have been changing on subtle levels for a while. This is supposed to give us faith. It's supposed to help us to realize that even if we practice and we're not feeling the fruits in the moment, that it's still very, very worthwhile because it is impacting us and imprinting us in much more subtle ways than we may actually feel. This is why we continue to practice, and every time is different. And so these 7 factors, beginning with mindfulness of body and breath, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of our thoughts, moving into the insights we gain from practicing, which is vipassana or vipassana, which is the second factor of awakening, meaning that we are able to sort of get insights from our practice. We're able to see that by practicing mindful breathing, we feel a change in the body. By having a disturbing thought or a distraction or some kind of rumination, we're able to look at it. We're able to bring some form of that first factor of mindfulness into the experience we're having and not shut it down or trying to control it or anything, but get to know it better. How do I notice this in the body? Certainly not judging what we experience and so on. So we covered this during that period. And then the third factor, energy, virya, the sense of cultivating a balance between nama rupa, this term that means mind body. It literally is mind body, the term for mind body that we find in the teachings. And then we move into energy, the third. So energy being this quality of balance. Oh, I just said energy. Fourth, cultivating a sense of joy, sometimes called rapture, This term bhavana that we talked about, really, it's a process of becoming. It's a process where this path of practice is opening. The foundation of our practice is now yielding fruits beyond just the foundations of being mindful. Um, and so this feeling of happiness, of delight, in a natural and lasting way, not just sort of ephemeral stimulus driven joy that we get from eating chocolate or watching a movie or whatever, but a deeper abiding sense of well-being and contentment. This is really what this means, and a feeling of vitality at the center of it. So easeful sense of joy. And then we moved into tranquility, this quality of, and I outlined in my own experience these four stages of cultivating tranquility in the midst of things that tend to disturb the mind and distract us. Renunciation, renunciation, a view that leads to more lasting sense of equanimity, which is what we'll talk about later. Acceptance, accepting impermanence, accepting the transient nature of experiences in a receptive way. Generosity of spirit, meeting things with a sense of openness and generosity and kindness, really cultivating a sense of love and genuine loving intention when we meet things that are difficult. And then finally, spaciousness of mind. All of this is um, could be its own, I think, its own workshop, working with these four qualities. And then last time we moved into concentration, samadhi, this term that isn't just about stabilizing attention, but it also has a quality of absorption. It has a quality of, um, as we cultivate in shamatha or calm abiding, we focus attention on an object of our awareness. And then as the mind settles, naturally comes this feeling of well-being and tranquility. Just like the quote that I read earlier, that just as water, if you do not stir it, remains clear, so too does the mind, if left alone, find its own way to tranquility and peace. And so concentration, not just an exercise in mental capacity, but it has a cause and effect in our practice. That awareness arises spontaneously and a sense of calm comes too. And then the second part of concentration being this absorptive quality where we're no longer working to retrieve the mind, we're able to keep the mind balanced in an effortless way. We found that spot between effort and effortlessness where we are now abiding in an open way. The effort is largely minimal, and we are actually absorbing or mixing the mind. This is another way to say it, mixing our own mind with the object of attention, which may be a candle flame, it may be a mantra, it may be awareness itself, an open sky, this notion of open sky mind, and mixing our awareness, our mind, with this notion of open sky mind, feeling spacious. So concentration here has a lot of sort of implications. It's not just steadying the mind, right? And then finally, here we are. We arrive at number 7, equanimity. And it's interesting that equanimity is the last factor of awareness. It's not first or second as part of mindfulness or tranquility. And I thought about this and I thought it's interesting. I wonder why the Buddha taught equanimity to be the final of the 7. And largely, um, this has some depth to it, I think. If we think about equanimity as an evenness of mind, a balance, a stability, we may still feel things. We may still feel, agitation coming and going. We may feel nervousness in the body or restless thoughts and such. Equanimity says it's okay. This doesn't mean you're not practicing this sense of stability. It just means there's more mind stuff coming up. And equanimity helps you ride through that without having a preference to be free from distractions, nor do you get attached to the distractions. No preference. This thought here is very much like this thought here. This may feel like a pleasant thought. This may feel like a disturbing thought. Simply thought. Simply thought. We are untangling ourselves, unhooking ourselves from this dualistic framework where I want this and I don't want that. I'm clinging on to this and I'm getting rid of that. I like the praise, I don't want the blame. I don't want loss and I want gain. I don't want pain, but I do want pleasure. You see, all of those dualistic states, it's hard to stay neutral. It's hard to stay non-reactive when we are clinging in aversion. We are in attachment aversion. And so equanimity says, okay, I get it. We have these polar opposites. We have these dualistic ways that we are habitually reacting to everything outside of us and inside of us. That's fine. Let's take a moment and find a sense of balance and stability in the spine, in the physical body. Let the earth element deeply root us in this moment. And whatever we're averse to will change, and whatever we're wanting, that will change too. But let's find the middle path between extremes. How much of us just bounce between extremes constantly? Part of this is a sense of non reactivity. We're learning how to just allow. And the fifth factor, tranquility, renunciation, acceptance, generosity of spirit, I think speak really well both to tranquility, but concentration and equanimity. Either way, the Buddha tells us in the mindfulness teaching to cultivate continuous mindfulness. Cultivate a state of continuous mindfulness. And equanimity is really one of the keys. This is where the mindfulness practice gets its longevity, its momentum. It does no longer is it just I'm concentrating, I'm not concentrating, I'm concentrating, or I'm feeling tranquil and now I'm not feeling tranquil, or I have energy, or now I'm checking out, I don't have energy. The elephant appears and I feel heavy and I want to go to sleep, or the monkey mind comes in. I always like this notion of the monkey riding the elephant. They're both coming in together. Isn't that great? So, touching awareness here is the key. Touching awareness, equanimity, just naturally emerges as part of this state where tranquility, concentration is no longer full of effort. Equanimity arises naturally along with the stillness. Touching awareness, we find equanimity. And largely what we're doing is we are recognizing in that moment a state of what we might call non-duality, really at the heart of many of these teachings. A state where we're no longer finding preference, we're no longer needing things to be this way and not wanting them to be that way, and yet we are highly engaged. This is the key. So equanimity is not apathy. It's not indifference. We are highly present, highly engaged, but we're able to find that kind of balance. Awareness itself is showing us the way to be non reactive and non judgmental about everything we're experiencing. Rather, this middle way, touching awareness, opening to a state, what we might call neutral witness. Some people call bare awareness or natural awareness. It's all the same thing. That there is this part of us that is always there, abiding, abiding in a subtle, refined way. And equanimity is part of that quality. The reactive mind, the habit body, is not part of that awareness. And so the Buddha tells us you can do this. You can abide in continuous mindfulness for a period of time. Yeah. If you are not feeling this, know it can be cultivated. Keep your faith, keep the confidence in your practice. and know how you can cultivate it. Meaning that you don't have to try to think your way through it, but there is just sort of this innate knowing. And we find that too when the mind settles, by focusing on breathing and body and becoming aware of the one who is simply aware and bright and awake and feeling all of these seven qualities, sometimes simultaneously. There is no more distinction between them. Even for a moment. Sometimes we drop in for a second, and that's enough. It's enough to say, yes, this is possible. Yeah. Um, there's another in the Indriya Bhavana Sutra. This is the sutra where we find the four immeasurables: um, compassion, loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. Metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha. So it's important. Equanimity is not on its own. It's not on its own. It's important for us to remember that if we are in a state where we are feeling neutral, feeling a sense of maybe disengagement from things that are difficult, that we can easily slide into apathy, into indifference. This is not equanimity according to the teachings of the Buddha. Equanimity here must be balanced by compassion. In the same way, compassion must be stabilized by equanimity. The two are very much mutually dependent. Now, compassion can arise as, when we meet suffering, and, we may get caught up. We may feel so much empathy in that compassion that we start losing a sense of balance. We're starting to feel the suffering, and we don't know what to do with that. And so equanimity says, here, stability, presence of mind. Um, at the same time, compassion says to equanimity, you need to care. You need to remain highly engaged and caring, but stable and rooted. Evenness of mind, no preference. So this is something that I took to heart as a chaplain, and for those of you who are therapists or have worked with people, there are certain clients that you just feel affection for them. You just feel closer to them than others, and that's natural. Um, there were people who had terminal cancer that I knew, and got very fond of meeting with them sometimes for several years at a time, once a week. And the whole time I had to remind myself that these people are here at a cancer center, Dana-Farber Cancer Center, Brigham and Women's Hospital, where they may not make it. They may not make it. Most of them did. The good news, we don't hear about those, but this was a place where there were a lot of really good success stories. I could tell you a lot of those. And yet there was always that feeling, that question, will this person survive this? This bone marrow transplant, this surgery, this radiation treatment, this very harsh trial drug, chemo drug. And so um, for me, it was very important to remain deeply caring and also in this state of equanimity. Now, it didn't mean that I don't care what happens to this person. Of course, I cared deeply. But I also needed, for my own resilience in this work, to be stable. And so I practiced this lovely meditation that we've done here, I think, a couple of times, called Strong Back, Soft Front, developed by Joan Halifax. Um, any of you who are interested, there's a great book called Being with Dying that she wrote several years ago. And in that, she shows us how to practice with the physical body equanimity as being expressed by our spine, this stable spine, this posture of presence. We can do it right in the body, and compassion being exemplified by just the soft belly. So strong back, soft belly, equanimity, compassion, being perfect balance within the physical body. This was very helpful for me, actually, in doing the chaplaincy work, to remember. And many of us are walking around with the opposite, with a strong front and a weak spine, you know. So we can flip that and be loving and compassionate, but also stable in that. Very, very helpful. Um, so in the Indriya Bhavana Sutra, the sutra on the four immeasurables, the Brahma Viharas, loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. About equanimity, the Buddha says, just as water rolls off a lotus leaf, this is peacefulness in equanimity. Just as water rolls off the leaf of a lotus, this is peacefulness in equanimity, meaning that all of those thoughts and all the things that seek our attention that otherwise might cause us to react, when we are able to just abide in equanimity, they're like drops of water on a leaf, and they drop and they roll away. Another one drops here and it rolls away. This is the spirit, anyway, of cultivating this quality of equanimity. We have gathered the mind inward. We have gathered the mind as a whole at the source of our awareness, and distractions and thoughts become like that. You know, like that. It all sounds good. Now, how do we do this? Right? And so part of that is, of course, not necessarily any kind of advanced meditative sadhanas, but it's mostly just continuing to practice the basics more deeply. This is what helps us. This is the foundation. Even if we go on and do tantric practices, vajrayana, whatever it may be, we keep the basics and we deepen them. That will help us with all of these factors of awareness and help us to remember we can cultivate each of them if we don't feel them, and know how to cultivate them when we don't feel them. So we're not being told that we can't be distracted or that we have to experience all of these factors all at once, or there's something wrong with us, or we're not enlightened. But on the contrary, we develop a capacity. Yeah. And equanimity here is non-reactive and non-judgmental when we're able, and to focus on basics, to sort of reclaim that birthright of awakening. So